And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the big topic for our first session. How are we faring on acting decisively? How are we faring on acting boldly, on taking up space in the world? And how can we do that better? How can we become bolder, more competitive? On that topic, we are so excited to introduce our first speaker of the day. He has decades of experience at the interface of tech, industry, and investment as an entrepreneur, CEO, and board member of international companies such as Deutsche Telekom, Allianz, or Spotify. He currently heads the continent's second largest defense manufacturer, so he's a great person to talk to about all this. Ladies and gentlemen, please give your first huge round of applause of the day for the chairman of Airbus, René Obermann.
Hi, Professor. Morgen.
René, thank you so much for being with us. I'd like to start the conversation with a few questions, and then, of course, you all will get a chance to chime in. And I'd like to start on the topic of the recent headlines that I'm sure we've all read and followed about these negotiations that have been going on, mediated by the United States between Russia and Ukraine is maybe the wrong way to put it, but the negotiations to find an end to the war and also to find sort of a new security architecture for Europe. What are your thoughts when you look at the role and the space that Europe is taking up in these negotiations?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. First of all, I think the relevance of a peace treaty cannot be overestimated, because if the situation in Ukraine remains unstable after such a treaty, if it ends up as being a dictate peace, which is not acceptable, for which many thousand people haven't died, and the Ukrainian people cannot accept, then we have a very unstable situation, and that will not be sustainable at all. And to me, it's also a question how one can secure that peace in Ukraine. But before it comes to that, I think it's important that anything being negotiated includes the Europeans and the Ukrainians, and it's not just more or less being agreed between the US and Russia. And the initial 29 points proposal seemed to have been largely in favor of Russia and not acceptable to Ukraine. So let's hope the outcome of a more mediated process where Europe has a role at the table works and is acceptable.
Yeah. Let's talk about how Europe gets that seat at the table. I mean, how do we change that?
I think for more than 30 years, Europe took kind of a holiday from political reality. After the Iron Curtain came down, we allowed our, defense capabilities and deterrence to completely wither. We saved, alone in Germany, 1.3 trillion euros, the equivalent of that, of defense spendings, and over these last decades. And we are now waking up in a reality where if you think it's purely economical strength and industrial strength which secures you a seat at the table in these kind of negotiations or in international difficult situations, then it's completely naive. And at the same time, we were completely ignorant by believing that we Europeans, without having a significant military capability, we could teach European ethical lessons everywhere in the world. And as a result, we lost important nations, i.e. India, to become completely dependent on autocratic suppliers for their defense systems, because we always said, no, we don't export. So it was naive, and it was, in real world, it was wrong. And now we need to fix that.
Exactly. Let's talk about how we fix it. So you've previously said that in order for European military deterrence to be credible, we need to emphasize air sovereignty, because we don't have the resources, economically or societally to fight a war of attrition the way that it's being fought in Ukraine right now.
Yeah.
So what is your view on where we currently stand in terms of assuring Europe's air sovereignty? And what are some specific projects as well with Airbus that you are pursuing to help that along?
Yeah, I mean, air superiority would consist of a number of components. It's not just one product. It's not just about fighter jets. It's a more complex and more comprehensive thing, ranging from electronic warfare capabilities, where, Russia, for instance, is very strongly equipped with. They have an area denial bubble of 500 kilometers or so, and that means it's very hard for anybody to to defend or even attack in this bubble. So we would need to come up with stronger electronic warfare capabilities ourselves. We are still somewhat dependent on the US technology there. We do not yet have our own real deep strike systems. We had a treaty with the US to station Tomahawks in Germany, Tomahawks with conventional warheads, which would have a reach of 2,000 to 2,500 kilometers. So they would be capable to, go deep into the land of potential aggressor to, disturb or destroy logistical targets, which is extremely important in such a situation. We're not equipped for high-intensity, high-speed warfare at the moment because we're lacking the transparency. We don't have enough early warning capabilities. That is just to mention 3 of the items. And then, of course, it's about manned, unmanned teaming of systems, i.e. so-called UCCAs, unmanned collaborative combat aircraft, and fighter jets of the 4th and 5th generation. So all of these items comprise what I would consider air superiority capabilities. And what do? We have a couple of initiatives. Of course, we are in the unmanned area. We're developing systems there. We're also doing something to help defend against kamikaze drones. As you know, Ukraine is being bombarded almost daily, and for those of you who have been there, you could see what the destruction looks like. Hundreds of these kamikaze drones come into the country and terrorize the civilians. That is extremely brutal, and we need better defense against that. So that's something we're pursuing. We're also, of course, working on the evolution of the fighter jet capabilities. And most importantly, we're engaging in space. Why is that relevant? For those of you, who has used Starlink so far? Nobody has used Starlink? One?
A few hands
Can't be
up
true.
in the air, but not, I would say.
Elon Musk is claiming he has hundreds of millions of customers, so you all must be some of those customers. So apparently, but
They're not in this room.
But there's an important point, apart from the joke. Starlink is the only real Western world accessible low Earth orbit satellite constellation. Low Earth orbit, which has high data throughput and low latency. That means you can transmit data almost in real time in big quantities, in big volume. It's very important for communication, but it's also very important for military purposes and military applications. Ukraine has been completely dependent on it. And if you recall, at the beginning of the war, it was interrupted for some time, and that was extremely exposing Ukrainian security. Europe has nothing comparable. So we are in the hands, this is de facto a monopoly for internet access via satellite. And we're de facto in the hands of one US entrepreneur who we all, I don't know what you think, but admire, I guess. I'm a little more differentiated. I think this is critical. It's a dependency which Europe cannot afford. Airbus, together with Thales and Leonardo, we are now working on a combination to be capable to do something against that monopoly and build something up within Europe because it's so strategically relevant for Europe.
So, I mean, it is encouraging to hear that you are working on these things and you are working to ensure more European independence in these areas. Can we do it fast enough? Because we've heard warnings from security services that Russia could be preparing to attack NATO EU countries within the next 5 years. Now, as we've also heard on the stage several times now, Europe is maybe not the greatest at always acting fast. We're seeing hybrid attacks escalate, and we're seeing that we don't really have the resources to defend against those or to prevent those. So can we face the threat in time?
Well, first of all, I think it's a bit of a Kool-Aid which we're drinking, thinking that we have 5 years' time. If you look at reality, take a look at what happens on building on their build-up of the troops. If my information is correct, they're building up well beyond the need for Ukraine, up to 30,000 new soldiers a month, stationed to some extent on the east flank of NATO and Europe. That's number one. The command structures have been densified. There's a lot of stationment of high capability weapons and weapon systems along the east flank. There's an increased activity on hybrid war. You know that how many sea cables or subsea cables have been destroyed over the last 12 months? Has anybody gotten a guess? It's like 8 or so. So these attacks on critical IT infrastructure, in case something happens, are a precursor of a hot war, and should be seen as a potential precursor of a hot war. Then we have all the other stuff: cyber espionage, cyber attacks, data exfiltration, all kind of things in the virtual world and in the physical world. So these are precursors. Then you see all the military activities, which I just mentioned. Then you have certain political logic to consider, but I'm not going there because it takes too long. So I think it's a myth that we shouldn't believe that we have 5 years' time, because why would they wait if their target is, to close the Suwalki corridor between Belarus and Kaliningrad, or if the target was the Baltic states, as many experts believe, and intelligence services, report. So if that's the target, why would they wait until we all have our acts together? Huh? We've been sleeping for too long. Now, why would they wait? Because we're waking up. Can we do it fast enough? The question is what? Deterrence is the best recipe. It has helped us across the period of Cold War to sustain peace, and together with diplomacy. And I believe that is today still the paradigm, should be the paradigm. We need to tackle the low-hanging fruits in Europe in order to become more effective and be faster and better prepared. Number one, and I only mentioned two as two examples. Number one, we need to standardize our systems, because it is completely insane that Europe operates 105 or so different weapon systems and standards, system variances, i.e. in artillery, whereas the US has a fifth of that at much higher budgets. And at the same time, not only do we have these fragmentation and Kleinstaaterei, petty parochialism, at the same time we spend half our money outside of Europe. So we don't even ensure that European players can actually speed up production capacity and innovation skills by committing so much money outside of Europe. So that is the second thing where I think we need to act as a Team Europe finally and do something about that. The second thing I want to mention is, yes, we need mass of effectors and systems and defense capabilities, i.e. an air shield, i.e. a drone system which can help defend the east flank, and so on, and drone defense particularly. That's like the new Alarmanlage, is drone defense systems for all your universities, businesses, private homes, etc. You will see this will have a good conjuncture going forward. I don't know, has anybody ever had a private drone intrusion in your... Like nobody noticed?
There's 2 hands back there going on.
Yeah, I can
3.
also
So there's
witness this. It's kind of weird. You sit on your terrace and all of a sudden a drone comes up and measures your piece of property and your house and so on, and goes into this direction there, and nothing you can do. It's weird. We need something about that. ETH is one of my big hopes, by the way, the tech university folks here. So bottom line, we need to standardize and we need to innovate. And the innovation element has to change big time how we do it. Because in the past, MODs, ministries of defense, and governments told the so-called primes, established large companies like Rheinmetall or us, what the innovation should look like. And then, we embarked on they got us a specification which was usually gold-plated and very complex. And then we had ample time to develop, and they paid for the development, so it was kind of a risk-free model. And what do you think the outcome is? Excellent innovation? Now, the outcome is usually too slow, not on budget, and not really what was needed back then when the initial idea was conceived. So the paradigm has to change.
I want to ask you a final question on security before we move on to Airbus and to all of your questions, because you've said a few interesting things. You've said that we need to standardize our systems, work together, act as a unit, and at the same time you said that, why drink the Kool-Aid? Many people think that we have more time than we do. And you've also mentioned political factors, and of course the political will is always one of the factors that is going to determine whether or not we act as a unity. But only 32% of Europeans say that they would be willing to defend their country in the event of war. Like you've said, many people underestimate the threat. what if not enough Europeans are willing to, let alone, the intricacies of making it happen, of standardizing the systems and of improving drone defense, but what if not enough Europeans are willing to make it happen because they say, well, the Baltics are far away,
I'm a German. My wife is from Eastern Germany, and we had different socializations, but I think the Germans learned it the hard way. What if everybody remains opportunistic and on the sideline? And the Eastern Germans also learned it the hard way. And because for too long, people who have influence have not dared to speak up. Politicians have lost credibility to some extent, and quite a large extent. Even media these days are being defamed and attacked, and they're losing credibility. People who are in business, like entrepreneurs like yourselves, you have credibility, more or less. People listen. If you raise your voice and argue for the cause of European collaboration and security, if you personally engage, people listen. And yes, it is dangerous. Yes, you may be on the target list of some aggressive power. That could happen. And yet, if we don't speak up, if we don't engage, if we don't try to convince publicly, politicians can't do much. Because political leaders can only act upon their mandates they're given. And if the broader audience, the broader public is not convinced we have a situation where we need to change, then it's hard for political leaders to prioritize, for instance, security and resilience investments. Even with companies, for instance, what does it mean? When a large corporation works on resilience, for instance, it has to increase the expense on precautionary measures or increase the working capital because you need more stock of critical components for a crisis situation. That leads to criticism. The capital market then says, why are you spending so much money on your working capital? Why are you not decreasing your overhead? It's inefficient. So I think we need to, all of us, beware of what it takes in our companies and what our voices mean. And as far as I go, I don't think business of business is just only business, because that's a recipe for disaster if we continue the way we do. We need to change.
Thank you so much. That was a very clear message, I think, to everyone in this room to use your voice, to get engaged into the dialogue, and a very similar message to what Federal Councillor Cassis said last night. To really, the people in this room have influence, they have a voice, and the message was the same last night as it is now, to use it. I'd like to talk about the role of business and the role of Airbus specifically in a minute, but first I would like to give you the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to ask your questions. So I believe there is a QR code now on the screen that you can scan, and it will take you to the app and give you the opportunity to ask your questions. I'll see them here on the screen, and we'll be able to pass them along.
Is that your way to filter out questions which are too difficult?
There is some selection going on, but it's mostly for coherence and length. It's not. I don't think we're censoring anyone or anything. Let's talk about the role of business and the role of Airbus specifically, because Airbus is one of the rare examples where truly European cooperation works, right? It's a globally competitive company, it's a strategically relevant company, but it's also an inherently European company across many European countries. Why do you think that kind of collaboration works for you? And what are your tips, your suggestions for people who have to navigate management in such a complex environment with managing political expectations, you're managing private customers, public customers, and also sort of a lot of societal responsibility?
The genesis of Airbus has been created by some visionary political and business leaders together. The idea in the late 60s or so was, can we ever come up with a competing aircraft vis-a-vis Boeing? Or will this strategic industry forever be lost to the United States, like we are losing AI at the moment, if we don't pay attention? So is there a chance to build something? And therefore one decided at the time, Franz Josef Strauss was involved and some others, decided at the time to combine forces between German, French, and then eventually Spanish and British companies, and create a system from development to component delivery to final assembly, and so on, get the resources, get the people, get the industrial sites, and get the logistics organized between those countries and those companies in particular. And at the time, that was the right model. And then over time, the company emancipated itself from political influence and became just a regular company where 3 states are still shareholders. France is shareholder, Germany is shareholder, with each having 11%, and Spain has 4%, so that makes it a total of roughly 26%. And the rest is largely Anglo-American and European free float. And of course, we have all the big investors in our capital, in our cap table. So it's a normal company now. It's governed independently, that I can assure you. We're not politically driven. We're governed by our vision and our mission and our core beliefs and our strategy. And so far, if I can say that after Corona, where we had a big crisis which we needed to manage like many other companies, we came back with full force, and we are now the market leader global market leader in so-called single-aisle aircraft. And we are working hard to improve our position and catch up even on the wide bodies. And we are now working hard to become even more competitive on the air defense side and air power side. That's our position. And we just combined our forces. We independently manage the company. And it's a very European model.
How do you make that unity work? How do you make that very concretely, very specifically? What are some tips on this cross-country collaboration?
Look, in practice, it's not always easy because countries are sometimes involved and governments are sometimes involved in, for instance, developing programs which go beyond the normal horizon of what a private investor can do and therefore require some support, i.e. the hydrogen infrastructure for a future of hydrogen and emission-free flying. And sometimes, when it comes to these collaborative approaches, public-private partnerships, whatever you call it, there is the element of what they call geo-return. And I personally think that's the wrong idea, because I think geo-return should be European rather than nation by nation, but that's a separate topic. So it's sometimes it requires a bit of a fine balance and walking on a thin line, but it usually works. And I can say that each country alone would have had the capabilities to come up with the research, the technology basics, and so on, to be what Airbus is today. So it was necessary to combine forces.
Let's talk about businesses assuming sort of their societal responsibility, because you said, it's no longer just about the bottom line. Companies need to see themselves as political actors to a degree. And you've also said the responsibility.
No, I didn't say companies need to see themselves as political actors. I meant to say, and maybe I expressed myself wrongly, that company leaders, business leaders, university leaders, people who run big hospitals, you and others, all of us, we have a voice, and we should use the voice for what we think is the right cause. So we have to engage in politics.
Sorry, that was my mistake. I paraphrased it badly. It was not political. It was societal actors, right?
Yeah,
Companies need to see themselves as
yes.
societal actors. And so, aside from speaking up and making your voice heard, what do you suggest that the people in the audience do in terms of representing their interests or communicating their interests as well to political decision makers? Because I assume that this is something that, at Airbus you are very involved in with, you said, governance and politics. So what are your tips on managing that relationship?
Yeah, I think the old paradigm was companies and their lobbyists and their associations were doing lobbying work with a narrow mindset. I'm definitely a culprit of that myself. I used to run Deutsche Telekom for many years before Tim Hodges took it over from me. And I was the first, actually, who was fighting for better telecoms regulations in the best interest of Deutsche Telekom. And I don't think this was the most appropriate approach. Today I would do it slightly differently, because I would try to understand the holistic picture of what is the targeted system by policymakers and why is it and where is probably something sensible in it. But I do think that companies in general should be more aware of their effects they have on other industries and on society as a whole, and therefore should have that in mind, should be more stakeholder-driven even than they are today, and not just shareholder-driven.
And how do you build that awareness? I mean, do you get in consultants who can look at the bigger geopolitical picture? Do you hire people for that? How do you integrate that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we seek information and analysis from various sources. For instance, at the board of Airbus, we have regular exchange in our offsites and sessions and strategic sessions also with external experts, political analysts and so on, because geopolitics today is quite a dominant aspect in the boardroom. And the work of a CEO or the work of senior leadership teams is more and more, they need to spend more and more time on this, because if you have a globally interwoven supply chain, or if your customers are global, like in our case, we're like in 130 some countries, then the geopolitics are extremely determining your future. And if you're not aware on what is coming, you can't take preventive measures or you can't build resilience. So to be very close to the decision makers and understand what's going on is part of a CEO's role today. And I think people need to change a little bit in order to realize that, particularly in global companies.
So that's another strong takeaway, aside from using your voice, is spending more time understanding geopolitics. So we have some questions from the audience here. The first one being, would you say a European army would help?
Look, I think the answer is, if we have time to build it and time to develop a culture within Europe where it's no longer considered an element of pure national sovereignty, which is still quite often the mindset in Europe, if you speak to European member states. If that understanding and that conviction can get built, then yes, in a situation where the mindset is, it's actually a national sovereign topic, but okay, we need to dedicate a few people into this, but we still keep doing things like we always did, then it's no use. Therefore, a coordinated approach under the NATO umbrella, under the European NATO command of all the European contributors, member states, as of today seems the most reasonable approach, because we are culturally within Europe where we are, which is still a collection of states as opposed to a unity.
So the key is very much making that collaboration happen in whatever way is most...
because you can't do it the other way around, right? Yeah. It's a result of a growing together culture.
I'd like to pass on another question from the audience. The Baltics are most likely to be hit next by Putin and Russia. What do you think realistic preparations should be in the region? And maybe if I can add to that, because speaking about what politics or governments should do is one thing, but speaking also to what you said about the hybrid threat increasing, what are some preparations that everyone in this room can take also for their business, their hospital, their university, like you said?
Well, that's complex. And I tend to speak too long, so need to be careful. The Baltics, I mean, there are reasons to assume that's the case. I still think it's a little speculative what happens, because there are different scenarios. But yes, the Baltics themselves, they have been in my office, the Baltic presidents, already more than 10 years ago, and they were all extremely concerned back then. Today, of course, the situation has escalated already, and you see some airspace violations already. You see drones, you see jamming, which means some civil aircraft have to take a different course because they can't go through the jam zone, and so forth. So you see hybrid attacks. I was in Tallinn lately, a few months ago, to talk to folks there and to the defense folks there, and almost half the population is willing to engage. They're super committed to defend their freedom and work against the narrative of, oh, we need to protect our citizens here, and therefore, the same story as in Ukraine. So it seems the Baltics are prepared mentally. Seems a high likelihood that this could be the next critical exposed area. But the willingness of the Baltic states to organize themselves in conjunction with European NATO forces and to prepare should not be underestimated. It's not going to be a walk in the park for any aggressor.
Maybe this is an interesting follow-up here. I mean, there seems to be like a geographic divide when we look at it, right? Because like you said, preparedness and sort of the mental readiness in the Baltics is quite high. It's the same in Poland, as we've seen from their increasing in defense spending.
Yes.
It's the same in much of the regions bordering or closer to potential aggressors. And the further you get away from that geographical region, the more it seems like these issues are quite removed from us, and why should we worry about it? Do you have thoughts on how to bridge that gap?
Again, it comes down to conviction building and to awareness. I don't think there is a secret sauce in which this can happen within 2 weeks. I think this will take more time to and a lot of us to engage and inform people about the situation and also explain a little bit the backgrounds, because it's not so easy to convey the message. We have been sleeping in what we would call peace dividend nausea for many, many years. And the money was there and available to do social spendings all over the place, and this is what the money was used for. So it's very hard to re-educate that what we need to do will be hard and will cost and will have to, unfortunately, cost deprioritization of some other things which we have learned to love. And therefore, it does require more conviction building. And also, I think the elites in our country, at least in Germany, and I'm not sure about Switzerland or other countries, I think we have to be better role models. In order to convince people, we have to be role models. We can't say, okay, if it gets hot here, we have our second home in South Africa because we can afford it and we're gone by the day it happens. Gosh, what do we tell our soldiers who are out in the field, have been miserably supported over the last decades? Now we tell them, you go and fight, and I go to my second home in South Africa. That can't be right. So we have to work, all of us, and be aware of this and be better role models.
There was a question before from the audience that I really wanted to follow up with is, how do you personally do it? So what measures, what specific measures do you suggest that the people in this room take? Is it posting on social media? Is it speaking to media outlets like Ignacio Cassis said last night? Is it going on TV shows? Is it speaking to your colleagues at conferences? Like, what specifically should we do?
I think if we, all of us, first of all, assuming we share the situation, the analysis of the situation and the necessity to do something, assuming that, I think if we start to engage and use our relevant platforms we have, all of us are being listened to, and we can create a more European movement in regards to preparing and becoming more resilient, by the way, also in the civil sector. Not just militarily speaking, also in the civil sector. Is that the question I should answer? Let's
briefly, yes, in a moment, but let's, because I think that's a very good question to finish on, but let's briefly touch upon resilience in the civil sector, because I think that's interesting to many people in this room as well. So as a CEO business leader, what steps should every business take to prepare themselves and their employees and their business for the next 5-10 years, for this period of hard things that probably is to come?
I think in isolation, it would be, if you were just to think about your own resilience, then you begin with your critical components and pre-products to be stored in various locations. You have a more resilient and robust compute infrastructure. If you use cloud, you make sure that you use a cloud provider who gives you that certainty that there is redundancy, sufficient redundancy, and so on. You make sure you have a data administration and data governance model, which also ensures, against attacks, that you're not an easy target. So you really work hard on the virtual side, on the data side, on the IT side. You work on your, storage, that you are prepared for such a hot situation, and you are part of. You need to be part of a network of other companies. Like you do it in CERT, in computer response for emergency situations. There's CERT teams all over the place. It's not the same for logistics yet. It's not the same for providing, for instance, food or supply, basic supply. So there needs to be a collaborative approach between military and industrial leaders. There are things happening already, at least on the German side. We have good contact to not just Airbus, also other companies. I'm part of such a circle, and these circles need to be intensified. So you have to do it in a collaborative approach.
I was just going to say, once again, that seems to be the answer, is unity and collaboration. Now, let me get to this question from the audience, because I think it's an interesting one to end on. So we've already talked about how Airbus has really shown that Europe can pool its strengths. Europe can create a European champion. We have the resources. How can Europe create an Airbus moment for AI? Because you've already mentioned we are not ahead in this, and I think this leads us over nicely to the next session as well.
Yes, it does actually, because Margrethe
exactly.
is had been part of the regulatory team in Brussels. I'm critical, not against Margrethe, she's good, but the regulation. No, she's really cool, but the regulation is crazy. And
you can discuss that with her, but
I have already.
In a moment.
I have, but the point here is I want to structure the answer. One is a regulatory answer. The other one is a, let's say, infrastructural answer for AI. and a energy, infrastructure and energy, and the third would be, the software element. On regulation, I think Europe has shot itself in the foot. Has anybody of you read the AI Regulation Act, which has been adopted? One and a half.
No, there's quite a few hands up here.
Well, that's great.
I'd say
You recall how many pages it has? More than 100. And then it has another 100 in the appendix to define, what and what not is affected. It is a ex-ante regulation. That means it describes what is critical and what needs to be, documented, etc., in a world which is completely undefined yet, as opposed to providing a framework of ethical principles and then delegate that ex-ante framework. Forget that. Delegate the monitoring and potential change and regulatory intervention to an expert team of people who really are concerned with the matter. Now it's all in a law, and it's very hard to change the law, even though the European Commission now is working on it. That led to a very low adoption of AI in Europe in business. I mean, developers, okay, they can still good developers document anyway, but it led to a slow adoption in Europe. So that needs to change, and that needs to change damn fast, because we're shooting ourselves in the foot, unnecessarily. The second point is compute infrastructure. When I read about gigafactories, I'm a little skeptical, because in Europe, if you run a gigafactory or a data center compared to the hyperscalers, or even close to what they do, you're talking 3, 4, 5 gigabit of future data center energy consumption. That's 4 or 5 nuclear power plants. In Germany, we have abolished nuclear power plants. You Swiss are lucky. You haven't, because you still have a decent energy mix. We simply, sometimes are naive in pouring tons of money into something which is zeitgeist, but if you do the analysis and you do the math, it won't work. So we should focus on a different approach and be more focused on providing support and infrastructure for the sector-specific small models. I mean, Mistral is one of the collaborative approaches we're using at Airbus. We're working together with. They're providing an LLM, but we should focus on the sector-specific ones, because this is where our strength lies, and the respective infrastructure. So I'm deviating what Airbus can do. I could go into that, but I think you need to stop.
No, I think the question was exactly how can we collaborate. I think you answered the question. How can we collaborate on AI the way that Airbus managed to collaborate and to pool our strengths in?
I mean, sector-specific, where you have specific data. The data are the precious thing you train the models with, and then you build agents for what you do with your company very well, and that you use foundational models from somebody else.
And I think the regulation point is one that we can get into in a moment. Thank you
Good luck.
much for sharing your thoughts with us.
All the best.
Obermann.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.